We're just waiting for Barney to be able to join. There we are. So you should see now a button. I'm inviting you as a speaker to join. So you just click on that button. It might be at the bottom of your screen. We are live. There we go. Hey, Barney, it works. Okay. There we go.
How are we, mate?
Pretty good. So it's always easier working with people under a certain age for accessing this. I always have challenges. People over a certain age, I have to spend so much time how to get in and how to do that, even though it's rather idiot proof. Is there something specific that I didn't mention in the text invitation to everyone? I mean, it's being taped, so they will be able to. Most people watch the replay, unfortunately. Sorry that you have to stay up so late or get up so early to do this. But is there something specifically that you feel we should cover that was not mentioned about important developments, challenges? Other, money is an issue, I get it, but technology issue, concessions. You see how long it's taking with trying to get Galactic moving on stuff. So things just take a long time.
No, I mean, I always have enjoyable chats with you, so we can just keep it organic. I'm sitting in Singapore currently, which is obviously the nexus of Southeast Asia. So I think maybe how the likes of Australia and Amsterdam and New York and all of these bigger hubs can help support developing nations, I think is under talked about. And so, I remember your fact when we were sitting in your beautiful living room. I think it was 1.1 or 1.2 billion people are smallholder farmers. What are we doing about them? So I think that's an important thing for me, because the likes of Bayer and all of these mega carbon groups and all of that, what about the the smallholder farmer with 2 hectares? How does ESG and the sustainability alphabet soup affect them fundamentally? I think that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I had another chat today with a pretty big ag investor. Money came from a Singapore organization, ADM Capital.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the founders is very keen on agriculture. He's a farmer. But when you look at what they're investing in, they talk about, agriculture and that, but they're not really focused on smallholder farmers. It's just supply chain, logistics, technology that kind of eliminates the farmers, bugs, getting rid of the bugs and stuff like that. So I become very, very disillusioned with so many of the claims and commitments and stories around climate solutions when, dude, fuck, excuse me, fucking grab a shovel. And,
Fully.
you can do so much with what you're doing and show results quickly.
Mm. And I think that really is the gap. I'm seeing big carbon conglomerates met with Gen Zero today, which is a $5.5 billion asset, natural capital accelerator from Temasek originally. And smallholder farmers, they're carbon doesn't support them because you need to have thousands and thousands of acres to have any equitability in carbon. So what are the modular, decentralized solutions of energy, waste, water that actually uplift and are relevant? Because if you're struggling with 20 palm oil plants or whatever it is, the costing of this stuff, it just doesn't line up for them, and they'll continue to spray yucky chemicals and rip into forests as much as they can until they get in trouble. And I think the smallholder farmers are almost the more under talked about demographic when it comes to biodiversity, land management, and when it comes to planetary boundaries. If we get it wrong with 1.2, I can't remember the exact fact you said, 1.2 or so billion people, we're in for a bit of a bumpy ride.
Oh, no, that's for sure. We'll start in about 5 or 6 minutes. This is just a kind of an intro. It's really because the biodiversity value or credit or whatever way you want to describe it has not been monetized at the level that the financial sector gets, because they're looking only for returns, and all the money going into climate tech is just chasing unicorns because they want their 10x. You're not going to give them 10x by helping the smallholder farmer. You'll get it maybe in other ways, but maybe not 10x. But you'll be able to provide a return that's acceptable, but maybe not acceptable to them because they have to hit a certain target, because they get a bonus or a carry on top of that. And that's really the driver. It's not even that they're not interested in smallholder farmers. They're just interested in returns. And I think the worst example I had, I was talking to a family office in Belgium that, big letters, we're very keen on regenerative agriculture, blah, blah, blah. So I told them about, Shared X, the regenerative ag company in Latin America that had raised $73 million, $73 million, and was really increasing yield for the farmers, sequestering carbon, blah, blah, blah. And, he says, so what's your business model? And I says, it's a farm. They grow fruits and vegetables, and they do innovation in restoring the health of the soil through biological treatments. And where did this fund wanted to invest? They wanted to invest in the 10-minute bicycle delivery for groceries, Getir, Gorillas. I don't know what the equivalent is in Australia, because that sector got $15 to $20 billion in investment, because they're just interested in the data. They're not interested in the food. So it's I share the frustration, and personally, I really believe that because the fires in Australia and Hawaii and flooding in China, in Europe, in Canada, forest fires, etc., that the pain of climate destruction will finally kick in, and people will realize that biodiversity is still the best and cheapest and fastest way of doing it. It's been doing this for millions of years. But when you're motivated from short-term performance, it becomes really, really, really a challenge. So why don't we just get started?
And I think just on just one more point, because I don't want it to be a negative Nazi.
That's okay. I can do that.
Yeah, no, but it really vital what we've just touched on. But I think fundamentally, I'm seeing shifting from the alphabet soup to really humanizing in what's the soul of building trust and capacity within all of this stuff, and getting the employees, the stakeholders, the investors. If you don't have that soul and that trust and that hope fundamentally that whatever solution it is has scale and legs to really transform the world, you're barking up the wrong tree. So I think coming back to that optimistic perspective that we can re-inject soul, data driven soul, but I think that that's an important thing to touch upon, because too many people are obviously just ticking boxes. So bringing that soul into commitments and bringing that hope and trust into commitments, I think is another more positive thing we can talk upon.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of wonderful people, like yourself and your dad and Christina Lee and so many other people. So it's not a shortage of heroes. It can be quite frustrating because we are speaking a different language. So when trying to humanize finance to someone who, is 24, making 400,000 or 500,000 a year, just, doing some analysis of a fund and never really ran a company, it's hard to communicate at that particular tone. So, but that's really critical. If you don't do that, you're not going to get through. So it's just hard kind of keeping the machinery moving forward and the spirits up. It's like when you were, crossing Antarctica or Arctic, or both of them, at certain times, what am I doing over here?
Fully. What gets you out of bed in the morning? Alrighty, we've hit the hour on the dot. Let's get rolling.
All right. So, Barney Swan, thank you so much for doing this, taking the time out, and also getting up at a godly hour to do this. I'm really very grateful. This is being recorded, so people will be able to watch the replay, which most people do, because everyone seems to be busy being busy. So briefly, for those that are listening live and those that are watching the replay, just briefly explain who you are and what are you trying to do with ClimateForce. What is the big purpose? And ultimately, how can the TBLI Circle and its members help you?
Well, Robert, it's a delight to share a conversation with you. I always enjoy our discussions, and fundamentally what we're doing at ClimateForce, we're an Australian not-for-profit, and I think we're in a really unique position to be between the three-headed beast of climate tech, biodiversity, and creating social resilience. And I think if we can merge those three edges of the triangle together, we can really create a model that is relevant for blended finance pathways, and indeed creating a safety net for our beautiful planet and both its creatures and the casual 8 billion people on board.
But what specifically, you've taken a rainforest in part of Australia, and you're trying to bring it back to life, which I thought was not possible with the rainforest.
Well, definitely not trying. We're actively bringing it back to life. We planted 13,000 trees this last 16 months, all geotagged on an interactive dashboard. And I think fundamentally right now, the carbon markets aren't supporting enough co-benefit rich projects that honor the likes of microbial life within soil, education programs, and indeed the utility needed within communities to actually support natural capital. So on a 527 acre wildlife corridor between the world's oldest rainforest, Daintree, which is a 180 million year old ecosystem, and the Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest reef system, 2,000 kilometers long, we're creating a very unique model that is specifically relevant to Southeast Asia, but indeed the tropics, the likes of the Amazon and Congo and various other locations around the equatorial band.
So you said you're a non-profit. I mean, we're in TBLI Climate is not for loss. The goal is to be for profit. It doesn't always work out. So you're a non-profit, which sometimes it's easier to get money for non-profit than it is to get investment for-profit. How has the financial sector and philanthropy, universe been supporting you? Have they been supporting you?
To be honest, the actual other philanthropic momentum has been supporting us to an extent, but primarily family funds and corporates have been our primary sponsor. And I think we are going to be a very unique case example of what blended finance looks like, because fundamentally, when it comes to planetary boundaries and a lot of other incredibly pressing issues like biodiversity collapse, pollution, equity, we really need to be shifting philanthropic models into commercialized pathways. So in a small way, I think we're living proof of that. Hopefully within the next 6 months, 8 months, we're going to be completed within creating methodology through both high biodiversity, organic restoration, tree planting, and indeed some climate tech solutions like precision ag robotics, pyrolysis machines, anaerobic digesters. We really need a lot of these modular solutions to help optimize existing land and really support that diversification of monocultures fundamentally, because monocultures are powering and feeding millions and millions and billions of people around the world. But how that is being done, primarily through lots of synthetic fertilizers, synthetic herbicides, synthetic pesticides. If we're not careful, we're gonna destroy our soil systems and indeed a lot of the other water and just indeed biodiversity generally. So especially insects, if insects fail, frogs fail, we're going to be in for a bit of a pickle. 2/3 of the world's carbon is sequestered within the ocean, so we've got to look after the plankton as well. And I think fundamentally it's the little guys that are going to be hurting the most if we can continue to act the way we do with synthetic chemicals for both terrestrial and oceanic management of food systems.
You just let's go a little bit deeper into this hybrid model, which you feel can be scaled and replicated. So you have a couple of really fascinating corporates that are, I don't know if they've actually signed the check yet or they're interested in signing a check. Can you walk us through why are they supporting you? What are they getting at? Because I think one was a mobile telecom company. I think you mentioned.
Correct. NTT Data, Japan's biggest telecommunication company, 180 billion revenue. 130 billion revenue, 350,000 employees operating in 65 countries. Very significant force in Japan, and they're helping us. Not helping. They've committed $750,000 over the next 3 years to support creating a next generation digital twin. So currently we have digitized our physical asset of the 527 acres that we're managing, our food crop, which is about 450 fruit trees, and indeed the 12,000 native trees that we planted. And we have a lot of active research around soil, water, biodiversity, LiDAR, bioacoustics, hopefully live soil samples soon. So NTT Data is keen on us because in a research and R&D sense, we're doing something in a very, very, very unique fashion. But funnily enough, actually, when it comes to NTT Data, they are actually more keen on talent retention and talent recruitment, because the longer a company's been around, the bigger a company is, generally, the harder they are finding it to both retain good talent and indeed recruit new talent. So being a younger organization, both in our employee force and in the fact that we've only been around since 2018, I think that they're really keen to signal that they are helping support innovation and helping drive forward critical levers that help support the likes of both climate tech, biodiversity, and indeed rural resilience. So I think the likes of that, it's a kind of dual-edged sword of both supporting their internal requirements of both talent retention, talent recruitment, but also being a part of really innovating something that we've created the canvas on, and they're going to be splashing a lot of paint and really contributing to take that to the next level. So I think that that's one good example. Another example of is MFS, the Boston-based, London-based asset manager. I think $630 billion under management. Again, carbon right now is a bit of a tick when it comes to net zero commitments, transitional plans, sectorial pathways, the alphabet soup. And I think a lot of companies are really wanting to partner up with projects that are really there for the long term, and that they have that year by year story that they can build upon. Because doing an offset program where you have no idea who's doing it, well, you might know the company or the umbrella organization, but fundamentally you don't know who's on the ground, you don't know where the trees or the mangroves are being planted, and fundamentally there's that disconnect. So I think within the spirit of bringing more of a humanized approach to corporate sustainability commitments, I think a lot of companies who are supporting us early on, because they see both that commitment and that longevity, that we are going to be around for a long time. And obviously earlier adopters get that get that seat at the table, and can build upon that story as time progresses, whether that's through funding or signaling or network access. I think early adoption with the likes of critical innovative projects is definitely on the rise, instead of just this box tick, let's do the offset, let's plant some trees and carry on.
And does NTT, are they looking to create a data research division based upon the work that you're doing in the soil scientists to capture that and offer that as a for-profit service? 350,000 employees, you're a small organization, so people can get inspired, but ultimately they're looking for for-profit opportunities, same as MFS. It's a fund manager. So they're probably looking, well, ultimately biodiversity will be a cost. So how do we measure this? Is that the background on them?
To an extent, I'm definitely being very wary, and you've been a critical advisor to always tread lightly with the likes of people not hoovering up your IP and carrying on gamely without you. But I think fundamentally they're really good at their smart management system. For example, NTT Data effectively has created the smart city of Los Angeles. Sorry, not Los Angeles, Las Vegas, the casino capital of Nevada. And so they're really, I think, will be a useful tool for us of all of our data. I mean, data, people can drown in data. You can be collecting all the data you want, but if you don't have a smart management software to effectively have the diagnostics and the analysis and the forecasting, again, I think that they're keen to collaborate on us. If we feed in all of these systems, and we're off grid, which again is a unique part of what the model that we're creating, because we also have the energy, the water, the waste, the shelter story as a part of supporting natural capital. And I think fundamentally they're keen to learn, because you're doing the forecasting on a city level, obviously they're very, very on it. But I think that they're very interested in how they can understand better, what works in a tropical environment, and then maybe plug and play that to both different tropical environments. But maybe you change the variables. Maybe you're changing the species. Maybe you're changing the employee. Maybe you're changing the labor prices. Maybe you're changing the access to materials, the proximity to energy. If you have all of the variables laid out, which fundamentally we do have, because we have to contain everything within the system that we're doing because we're off grid, I think that they're very interested to better understand that, and then have the ability to forecast and effectively troubleshoot with land managers and with biodiversity potential for other projects, and just better understand the market, because this is a very avant-garde space. Biodiversity 5-10 years ago really wasn't what it is, and definitely in the next 5-10 years I'm bullish that hopefully biodiversity can actually do better what the carbon market has failed on, in regards to avoiding double counting and fundamentally honoring both life systems within the soil, and making sure that we just don't continue to plant lots of pine and lots of eucalypts. If you plant more than 10 species in a reforestation project, not only is that good for the soil and the surrounding environment, but it creates a more resilient system, because pine bug can come in and smash all of your trees 10 years down the track and you lose all of your crop. But for us, we planted 75 species, and that means more resilience. So I think that they're really keen just to better understand that capacity for forecasting, and also what best practice looks like within this space. And I think in a small way there's a lot of amazing projects going on, but I think we are building definitely a best practice user case of what organic reforestation looks like with high co-benefits, and indeed understanding and modeling and costing of what it actually takes to have a community help support that.
When you were explaining to me the project, you were explaining that people kind of adopt a tree for a long period of time, which generates short-term cash flow for you, rather than waiting for verified avoided deforestation credits. Can you kind of explain a bit, how does that work?
Well, it wouldn't be avoided deforestation credits. I think personally, avoided deforestation credits and human-induced credits are two of the methods that have actually caused a pretty considerable amount of ruckus in the carbon space. So specifically, what our model would be contrasted against would be reforestation through melee planting. That's the emission reduction fund method through the Australian ACCU system, Australian Carbon Credit Unit system. And fundamentally, right now, with the voluntary market as it sits, it's not equitable for us to explore that on a small manner. And fundamentally, you need to be planting thousands and thousands of thousands of acres of crop to be actually viable from an economic standpoint when it comes to carbon credit. So what we're doing is really leveraging Web3 technologies, hopefully within the next 6 months, being able to put it on a ledger. And I think that NFT style tokenization really builds that trust, and it effectively creates a unit base within natural capital instead of obviously a carbon credit is a unit, but a carbon credit is often stacked within a hectare of land instead of it actually being a tree to tree basis. So I think the NFT style experience, I'm seeing more of a demand within that because there's both that proximity, trust, and effectively the cookie bread trail, whatever the expression is, the breadcrumb trail within it. And I think that that's really important to build trust. And fundamentally, trust is fractured right now within natural capital. So I think in our own way, we're trying to build. Not trying. Trying is so vague. We are building a model that effectively bypasses a lot of that bureaucracy. Whilst we're building out a model that indeed will be relevant for carbon, forestry, and other land-based diversification. And I'm not by any means bagging the carbon model per se, but I think when it comes to specific things like blue carbon, effectively, even though blue carbon is blue carbon, but when it comes to oceanic and terrestrial regeneration, I think we need to be focused more on biodiversity. And then I hope that then carbon would be more focused on the likes of, reducing your emissions on an aeroplane through more efficient means, or renewable energy projects, or better managing waste. I think carbon needs to be more focused on that industrial side, but when it comes to natural capital, I really think biodiversity needs to be the premium credit unit base to actually drive that forward, because right now biodiversity is a co-benefit to carbon, but it's actually not its own market currently, and that's an issue. $100 billion was committed at COP last year in Canada. Where is that going? Where is that bottleneck ending? Is it in climate tech, or is it actually in regeneration, both terrestrial and oceanic? So and indeed the blue carbon, which connects to those two systems. So yeah, that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think that needs to be a bit of a separation within carbon, within natural capital, because it's really not working currently.
The getting back to what you were saying, what are your expectations in the next 6 to 36 months? Will there be a realistic price for biodiversity credits or carbon, whatever it will be called, a kind of that you are actually drawing down carbon? Because I remember watching Professor Ratan Lal, who's like a soil scientist genius, and he's talking of the ability to draw down 330 gigatons if you restore the health of the soil and the vegetation, which is 150 parts per million. That dwarfs any of the climate tech things, but there's no unicorn. So basically a pricing mechanism for biodiversity has to happen if you really want to unlock all the money that's out there. do you think that there will be a realistic price for biodiversity credits for 6 to 36 months that will basically be an extra source of income for work that you're doing?
I mean, it's a hard question, or drop in the good questions, Robert. That's why I like our chats. It's, I think fundamentally, the decision will be if it's unit based or if it's contract based or if it's area specific. Those are the three decisions that need to be based, because obviously 1 ton of carbon equals 1 ton of credit. But what does a unit equivalent look like that for carbon, for biodiversity rather? It's hard, because how do you compare plankton to a whale, and how do you compare a happy fungi system in soil compared to a rhino? Is it biomass related? Is it the percent difference between a degraded ecosystem and a healthy ecosystem? So there's a lot of decisions there, whether on what that unit base looks like. And I think biomass fundamentally will have to be it, in my mind, because the biomass of the Sahara Desert is very different to the biomass of a wet rainforest. So I think biomass is obviously, you've got carbon biomass, and that's where I think the intersection between carbon and biodiversity is interesting, is that you have below ground biomass and you have above ground biomass, and largely carbon markets are addressing both of those, because you have soil carbon and you have above tree carbon. But how does biodiversity stitch in within that? Because you can have biomass of a monoculture pine forest, but you can have biomass of a complex wet rainforest system. So I'm hoping that within the next 6 to 18 months or 32 months, that we'll better understand what that unit base looks like and how it intersects and effectively elevates and reduces a lot of the kerfuffle that the carbon market is seeing with avoided deforestation and human induced. Those are the two methods that have really screwed it for the carbon market, because avoided deforestation, people are being like, yep, we're not going to rip down that forest and we're going to get carbon credits for it. And then the person next door is like, well, that's on a hill and it's national park, so what are you doing? Like no one is ever going to go bulldoze that and put cattle on it. Like, you're mad. And then with human induced, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, you've got 10,000 acres of cattle and you take the cattle off, and then you're claiming credits on that just for taking the cattle off, but you're not actually doing any remediation work. You're letting nature do its thing. But then one fire or one super drought or one existential environmental reality hits that, and then it's all back to baseline. So if we can really focus on that unit base for biodiversity, because biodiversity really does have to support the carbon, but it needs to also be its own subcurrent within that. And when it comes to natural capital, just as blue carbon has disrupted classic carbon modeling to an extent in regards to generally it being priced better than terrestrial carbon, I hope biodiversity can be like an even bigger step up from blue carbon, in the fact that it can actually be priced even better than blue carbon and green carbon. So it's a really waffled, incredibly indecisive answer, but I think fundamentally we've really got to get to grips on what that unit base looks like. And in my mind, it is biomass, but obviously organic biomass and living biomass, and the biome of the soil, the complexion of species, diversity. So I hope that kind of answers your question. And I think
partly, but let's try to find what would be a kind of idiot-proof solution, because I mean, the financial sector developed very complex stories that were basically fraudulent and basically collapsed the entire financial system. So it is possible to do something the right way if you want to. So what would be your ideal measurement? You're saying biomass as a measurement. What would that be? What would that look like? You're king now for a day. Develop a system that would put a monetary figure on biodiversity. Because I agree with you. I heard that Conservation International, what they were doing in Peru, they would go to the Ministry of Forest and they would buy a forest concession, which was a forest concession to cut trees down and sell the wood. So they buy the forest concession, and the next day it's a conservation concession, and they're claiming credits on all that forest.
So put the king of hat moment on, and forgive me for anyone who's listening who's far more of an expert than I am, but I have just been granted the king hat for a moment from Mr. Rubinstein, so bear with me. In my mind, there's an interesting GIS layer in the Australian model of pre-clearing ecosystem type. So I think when it comes to biodiversity, my idea, and it links to what we're doing on the farm as well, is to basically understand what a healthy ecosystem looks like. And obviously we have a lot of baselining globally on healthy ecosystems, and what the percent difference is from a degraded landscape returning back to a healthy ecosystem. And so I think that did I lose you, Robert? I think Robert might have abandoned ship. He granted me the king hat too early. I'll just wait for him to pop back on to make sure that we are all groovy. For anyone listening, I think Robert's just briefly abandoned ship on the call, but no doubt he'll be back. He's no doubt fretting and causing all manners of ruckus in his homestead, but fingers crossed it's not my end, but I think we're still live, so we should be groovy. And I'll just keep yakking because why not? The recording's still going. I think that when it comes to biodiversity tracking, there's so much amazing innovation within the space, like bioacoustics and soil water tracking, and really using automation, because fauna and fauna surveying with the binoculars and it has its place, but if we can use the likes of live sensors, live tracking to really better understand the complexity of what is happening, I think that's going to be the premium cutting edge next generation of what's happening. Sorry, Robert, I was continuing to waffle there for a moment. But fundamentally, I think when it comes to what that creme de la creme of biodiversity looks like, I think you really got to understand a healthy ecosystem, and then that percent difference of getting back to that. So whether that's baselining what a degraded ecosystem looks like, and then as you're planting trees, as you're diversifying a cane farm or a coffee plantation or a palm oil plantation or whatever monoculture you're dealing with, there will be a percent incremental difference as you're regenerating that landscape. So I think